you're trying to reach is not available. Please call back 19T2. The customer you're trying to reach is not available. Please call back. Data transfer complete.
The world has turned against this. They have not done it.
Oh my God.
There has been...
All right.
Vann!
Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned.
Student lay hospitalized in critical condition.
Hello and welcome to another show of APN TV Media. I'm your host, Bob Beatles, and I'm here with my lovely and talented co-host, Michelle Myring. We have a great show for you today with the author, Donald Levin, and we'll discuss him and his books. Coming up next. See you later. Welcome back. I'm here with author Donald Levin. He's written a number of detective novels. Now, Donald was a college professor, and he's taking to writing detective novels, and I'd like to have Donald tell us about how that came about.
Thanks, Bob. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, sir.
I appreciate you asking me here. I also just would like to give a shout out to Ingar Rudholm, my friend who's the author of a wonderful book called Traveling Circus, who's the one who put me onto you folks. So I'm very grateful for that. So thanks, Ingar.
He was an excellent interview.
I saw the interview with him. I
Yes,
did.
yes.
So he's a great guy. I have always been a fan of detective fiction. People are always surprised when they find out that I was a college professor and I write detective fiction, because they think I should be writing, high-class literary work or, poetry, which of course I do sometimes. But I've always written detective fiction, even when I was a little boy. I used to write scripts for Dragnet. I'd listen to Dragnet on the radio and watch it on TV, and I would try my hand at scripts for it. So it's always been a fascination of mine. And when I was looking forward to retirement, I knew I wanted to do something in fiction. I knew I wanted to be I've always been a writer. I've always written scholarly articles, poetry. I had a job as the speechwriter for the commissioner of the health department in New York City in the 80s and early 90s. So I've always had before I was a college professor, I was actually a professional writer for a long time. Not writing fiction and poetry, but writing speeches, scripts, everything you can think of. And when I knew I was going to retire, I knew I was going to move into writing fiction for my own self, that my name would be on, as opposed to people that I was a ghostwriter for. So for me, it was a natural sort of movement into writing detective stories.
Yes, that does sound natural. And with Lauren D. Esselman, it was a very similar situation. Mm-hmm. He started out as a reporter, and he was writing police news. After about 5 years of doing police news, he decided he was thinking too much like a policeman. So he got out of there and started writing fiction. Well, he wrote detective fiction, and, what more natural thing could happen?
That's right.
How long have you been writing, Donald?
I've been writing actually ever since I was a little boy. My father brought home a typewriter from his office one day when I was young, and I knew I had discovered my instrument as soon as I started typing it. You know how a musician discovers the piano or the guitar? I knew that the typewriter was going to be my instrument. I just love to write. I always
my son is 11. He just bought a typewriter the other day for $1. And I'm like, with all this internet, why is he buying a typewriter? All right?
Yeah.
But, good God, if he wants to write a book on it, grow up and be just like you.
Yeah. Is he a reader?
He is a reader, avid reader and
him.
writer, so he's starting at 11. So you started that age.
Yeah.
And now, when did you first become published? For your own fiction.
I published stories as far back as I want to say the 70s. This is a long time now. Once I was the speechwriter for the health department in New York, I sort of stopped writing for myself for a long time because I just got discouraged. I had some early success getting stories published, but then I wrote novels that didn't get published. I wrote stories that didn't get published, and it was just really too much for me. At one point, I had an agent in New York City for one of the early books, and I was all excited because he was the guy who sold The Towering Inferno to the movies.
Oh, wow.
So I thought, all right, I've arrived. But not so much. He sent the book around, and he sent the book around, and it got back, and he sent it around and got it back, and finally he sent it back to me and said, I really can't do anything more with this. And that sort of put me on a downward spiral as far as my own writing is concerned. So I concentrated on writing for other people. I worked for hospitals, I worked for ad agencies, I worked for PR agencies, I worked for the health department. I was a freelance writer for a while. And gradually the pressure to write for myself started to build up again. So I started, I guess in my modern age, if I can say that, I started publishing in, I guess it was the 90s. I started to publish a couple of stories, and then I wrote a novel that I published myself, and then I started publishing poetry. I started to write and publish a lot of poetry for a long time. And at one point, I was asked to do a large report for my college, the accreditation report, which took up 3 years of my time, fully 3 years of my time.
Wow.
I had to run the program, to run the accreditation project, and I also published, I wrote the report for it. It's a big 300-page report. And I remembered, after that, I remembered how much I liked to work in long forms, like a novel. So I started to write the first book in the series, Crimes of Love, and it took me about 3 years to write. And I would send it out and get it back, and send it out and get it back. And the agents I sent it to said, "You're a good writer, but the story needs to move faster." So I'd tighten it up and I'd send it out and get it back. And the agents would respond back to me and said, "It's a good story, you're a good writer, but it takes too long to get right." So I tighten it up and tighten it up and tighten it up. And finally, it got to the point where it is now, and it's a very fast read. People who read it like it very much and think that it goes very quickly. And I knew when I was starting to write that book that I was going to write a series, because that's what I had been reading. I had been reading series. Ian Rankin, you mentioned.
Yes.
Lauren Esselman.
Lauren Esselman's written,
yep.
yes, a number of series. And yes, Ian Rankin. Now, you wrote poetry.
Yeah.
Whose poetry inspired you to write?
There are two poets. That's a good question. There are two poets really who inspired me most. One was a poet named Philip Levin, who is a Detroit poet.
Okay.
He unfortunately he's no longer with us, but he died I think last year, or maybe the year before. And he wrote a lot of poems about Detroit. He wrote poems about the working life in Detroit. And I found them very moving and very affecting to me. So he inspired me to write poetry. There was another poet named Amy Clampett, who is not so well known as Philip Levin, but her use of language was just wonderful. Just you could almost taste the words in your mouth. She was such a good writer, and those were the two people who inspired me.
That's interesting to know. I was always supposed to John Donne, but that's really
That's gone back a ways, yeah.
Yes.
He's a good poet too.
Yes,
Yeah.
Great poet, yeah.
Yeah. You know, people, it's interesting that people who are not poets think that poets are inspired by going out and looking at the moon or contemplating eternity or something like that. But really, we're inspired by reading other poets.
Yes.
So we'll read a poet, and then we're inspired to enter into a conversation with that poet. And the result of that conversation is a poem.
That's very interesting. We just talked to someone recently who was talking about how to build a conversation with two people, and how one person says one word, another person another word, and you get a
Yep.
Yeah, that got Bob and I in a lot of trouble, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. We were going off in different directions there.
Right. Well, why don't you, Donald, why don't you tell us a little bit about your series in the books and tell our viewers exactly what they're in store for?
Sure. I'd be happy to. The book the series is a series of mysteries set in Ferndale, Michigan. Ferndale is right outside Detroit. It's the first inner ring suburb north of Detroit. Mm-hmm. It's a very small town. It's about 22,000 people. And the main character is a police detective for the Ferndale Police Department, whose name is Martin Pruess. There are 4 books in the series. I'm currently working on the 5th book, and I'm hoping to get the 5th book out probably next year. Wow. So the first book is Crimes of Love. It's about a 7-year-old girl who goes missing off the streets of Ferndale, and the police detective, along with the entire police department, is called out to look for her. She has epilepsy, and this resonates very strongly with the detective, because the detective has a son named Toby who is multiply handicapped, profoundly multiply handicapped. And one of the features of this series, I feel, that sort of separates it from other detective stories or police procedurals, is the wonderful relationship between Martin Pruess and his son. His son lives in a group home, and he's very vulnerable. He has cerebral palsy, he has visual impairments, he has cognitive impairments. He can't handle any of his own daily skills, so he has to be taken care of constantly. But Proust loves him fiercely, and Toby loves his father fiercely. So in addition to the mystery and suspense of each one of the books, you have this wonderful loving relationship between the two of them that everybody who reads the books finds very touching and finds very moving. So that was the first book, Crimes of Love. Second book is The Baker's Men, and The Baker's Men is about a shooting that happens at a bakery in Ferndale late one Sunday night, and the detective is called out to try and find out what happened. And as in all of the books, they start with an inciting, what I call an inciting crime, and then they open up into larger sorts of crimes, larger sorts of issues. They lead, as many detective series do, they lead to other crimes and other problems.
Now, does most of the action take place in Ferndale in these books, or does it spread out around Detroit?
It actually spreads out around metropolitan Detroit and around Michigan, as a matter of fact. The books go up to Traverse City. They go to Midland. So Proust follows the crimes wherever they take him. Okay. But they're basically set in Ferndale.
All right, that's interesting to know because some of the other detective fiction takes you around places in Detroit. There's one the action takes place in a little city near Zug Island, which is everything's shut down basically, and the criminal finds a place to hide there where nobody's going to find him. Yeah. But anyway, that's
they roam across the entire region.
Oh yes, there are lots of places to roam around Detroit.
That's right. So the third book is Guilt in Hiding, and I published that last year. The premise of that book is that a transport van for handicapped adults goes missing off the streets of Ferndale, just goes up in smoke. And along with the van, the driver is missing and also one of the passengers, who is a handicapped young man not Proust's son, but an older, handicapped young fellow. And this hits Proust particularly hard, of course, because of Toby. So he is called out to find out what happened to it. And as in the other books, it opens up into larger issues, larger crimes, larger problems. In that case, we have a sort of global perspective on things because his investigation takes him back to the Second World War in Europe, and he makes a number of discoveries. And the book that was just published, The Forgotten Child, published in April, he is retired in that book. He has, in the first 3 books were what we call police procedurals, which is where we follow the police as they go through their procedures for discovering the crime because he's a police detective.
Right.
He's retired in The Forgotten Child because he had he got into some political difficulties in the police department, and he decided that retirement was the better option to whatever awaited him. So he retired, and he is asked to look for a young man who disappeared 40 years ago. And at first he says, "No, I don't think I'm not a lost person finder." But then he starts to think about it, and he discovers that he thinks it would be a good idea to do that. And then so we're off to the races after they ask him to look for this child. And his investigation takes him, again, backwards in time, this time to the art scene in the Cass Corridor in Detroit in the 1970s. So it's a kind of historical look at Detroit. And also at the center of this book is a big fire that actually happened in Ferndale, historically accurate fire called the Ostrander Fire, where half of a city block downtown, in downtown Ferndale, caught fire and was destroyed.
That's a lot to lose.
Yeah, it was the biggest commercial fire in Ferndale. Yeah. So he goes back to that time and to that place and to that event, and makes the discoveries that he has to make.
And it's interesting you should mention the 1970s art scene, because anytime there's something like that where a large number of people were involved, you're going to still find some people who are living the same way they did then. Mm-hmm. Same attitudes, same lifestyles. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can find that probably all over the country.
Yeah. And the Forgotten Child, I think, is an interesting book also because Proust is retired, and the book is in part about how to go on after losing something that was so important to you, like your career. So one of the reasons why he decides that he's going to take this case is because he's sort of at loose ends. He gets to spend more time with Toby because he's retired, but he also knows that he's relatively young. He's only 50 years old as the book opens. So he decides that he's trying to find how to live after something that was very important to him got taken away. And that's essentially what happens with all the characters, because we go back to the 1970s, and all of the characters that he encounters have been trying to find how to live in the aftermath of this important time in their life.
Right.
Interesting.
And that is interesting. And in the Inspector Maigret novels by George Simenon, Maigret talks in there as he's approaching retirement. Well, I think you're not worth anything after 55. I guess that's the retirement age in France.
Yeah, that's young.
So he's a little discouraged. He doesn't like what he's facing.
Yeah.
And who does when they don't want to retire from what they're doing?
Yeah. No, that's right. And I was happy to retire from my profession, but just as Proust did, it's a little. You're at loose ends for a while, trying to figure out. Here's the thing that structured your life for so long, and all of a sudden it's gone.
Well, yeah.
How do you go on?
You boys are too young to retire. I'm telling you. Age is in the mind. Remember that. But I had a question. I noticed that your books are centered around Detroit area. I was interested in the demographics, and I'm also interested in why your characters, where you picked your characters and where they came from. I know you want to go to a break really quick, but I'm just throwing some things out there to maybe get to when we get back. What do you think, Bob?
Well, I'm ready for a break, and I'm sure he'll be. Donald will be ready when we get back from this break for anything you've got for him.
Okay. All right.
Welcome back. We're here with Donald Levin, and he's telling us more about his books, how he developed the characters and the locations. Now, how did you come up with these particular characters?
That's an interesting question. I have a T-shirt that my wife gave me that said, "Careful or I'll put you in my novel," and everybody thinks that that writers, you have to be careful around writers because they're watching every move that you make and they're going to put you in their books, and that really is not the case with me. There really is only one character in all of these books who is actually based on a person, and that is Toby, the character of the detective's son, Toby Pruce. He's based on our grandson, whose name was Jamie, who looks like Toby, or I should say Toby looks like Jamie, Toby sounds like Jamie, Toby has all of Jamie's challenges and joys. And unfortunately, Jamie is no longer with us. He passed away in 2011. Thanks. But Toby gives me a chance to keep Jamie alive.
Yes.
In the guise of this character. You know, you can do anything you want in art and in literature, and it allows me to keep this young man who was so important to everybody who knew him alive. So he's the only one who is really based on a living person, or not a living person, but based on a person who once was living, I should say.
You know, that makes it very soft to my heart. I mean, that he is based on a relative of yours, but it's interesting how in the book you do bring that up, especially in Guilt and Hiding, and you make that, because people have certain handicaps or special needs or anything, it doesn't create them as a different person. They're still one of us, and should all be accepted and actually treated as anyone else who walks down the street, and that you're bringing it to the eye of the reader. And that maybe that with that they can kind of develop a better understanding of what other people do go through, because you never know what goes on behind closed doors.
Yeah. That's exactly right. One of the real purposes of the book for me was to show people who might not have the advantage, if I can say that, of knowing a special child, that there are, we always think of the disadvantages. We think of what they can't do. But these books talk about what Toby can do.
They're amazing gifts that they have.
The gifts, exactly
qualities
right.
that most people walking down the street don't have.
Exactly right, exactly right. And Toby's father, Martin Pruce, wishes many times over the course of these books that he could learn the lessons that Toby teaches about how to live, how to enjoy the moment, how to radiate love to everyone. So these are lessons that Martin wishes he really could learn, and I'm hoping that the readers can learn these and also can see what it means to have a child who has special needs. How not only what the challenges are, but also what the joys, what the benefits are. They bring out something special in us. That's why they're special children.
That's an absolute inspiration. I applaud you for that.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
He's happy with all the time he spends with him. He just enjoys the time they spend together.
Yep.
And
Sometimes I think most of us people that some people consider normal are the special needs people in the world.
That's
if
right.
you know what I mean.
That's right. That's right. You make it, who's handicapped and who isn't. That's
Absolutely. And
yeah.
as authors, I think we're all handicapped. Just to throw that out there.
Yeah.
And the rest of the authors out there, I think they need to know that.
Right.
But okay, so let's talk about the demographics. How you pick the area's central location. Of course, you're from Michigan, so you're going to highlight. Thank you for bringing Michigan to the attention around the world. What made you pick Ferndale in Detroit?
Well, I live in Ferndale.
Fair enough.
And so it was convenient for me. I think Ferndale is an extremely interesting place. It's a wonderful place to live. It's very diverse. It's changing. Over the last 10 or 20 years, Ferndale has changed a lot. We moved away in the 70s. We're from Detroit, and then we moved away. And spent maybe 20 or 25 years away. And then we moved back when I took the job at Marygrove, which is where I used to teach, in Marygrove in Detroit. So this was in 1996. And from the late 70s to the mid-90s, Ferndale had undergone an enormous change. It used to be this sleepy little town that you sort of went through to get someplace else. Right. And now it's a happening place. I don't know if you've been to Ferndale, but it's a hot spot.
Really?
It's a real hot spot, yeah. So there have been a lot of changes that Ferndale has gone through over the last 20 or 30 years. And I wanted to take the opportunity to chart some of those changes in the book. So that's why Ferndale. And it's also convenient for me. When I walk around town, I can scout locations. I can say, there's where my bakery is going to be, and the Baker's Men.
yes.
And there's a 7-Eleven in Ferndale where that's where the Baker's Men starts. So I can easily scout the locations for Ferndale. Plus, it's also close to Detroit, of course. It's right across the famous 8 Mile from Detroit.
Okay.
And it gives me a chance to explore Detroit and some of the changes in Detroit. For example, in The Forgotten Child, which goes back to the 1970s in Detroit. And the Cass Corridor scene in the 70s in Detroit was very different than the Cass Corridor is today.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
They don't even call it the Cass Corridor anymore because of all the associations. They call it Midtown or Cass Village. They have all kinds of euphemisms for what they call it now. So it gives me, Ferndale gives me a base of operations, gives Martin Pruce a base of operations, and then he can range into Detroit. He goes to Sterling Heights. He goes to Warren. In the next book, he might come down to Monroe. You never can tell. So it gives me a chance to sort of incorporate all the interesting things and the nice things and the not so nice things that I know about Detroit and Ferndale.
I can understand that. Now, There was a book that was written about Detroit, or some things that happened in Detroit, called Masquerade many years ago.
By William Kenzie. Is it Kenzie or Kenzel?
I don't think it was. Well, you might be right on that.
Yeah.
But it was about a psychiatrist who got, and it took place around the Cass Corridor.
Yeah.
He got involved with a prostitute and her pimp, and they eventually cut him up and buried him in dumpsters all over Detroit.
Okay.
So that type of thing, you know, is not what you want a city to be famous for. So that's, I can understand why they changed the name of the Cass Corridor.
I was going to sit here like this. Well, all the police procedures, there's a lot incorporated in writing a mystery from a detective's point of view.
Right, that's correct.
I mean, you have no police. Have you ever been in the police department? Or do you,
No. I learned about it by research. I talked to policemen. I went online. I mean, it's amazing what you can find out online.
Yes.
I got books on police procedures. I've been in touch with the former police chief of Ferndale, who keeps me honest about some of the things that I do.
That's good.
So I learned it through research. I learned it through research like that.
Kind of like Columbo, but how is he able to go to different districts and different townships and different counties and do his investigative?
Well, he needs to, when he has to do that, when he needs to, he'll tell the local police force that he's there, and he'll tell if he goes out of town, he'll have to tell the state police that he's in their jurisdiction. If he's just out interviewing somebody, he doesn't need to do that. So he negotiates.
Well, we were talking about this earlier. What do you think the demographics of your book? Is it middle-aged children or middle-aged adults?
In terms of my readership?
Yes.
I would say, I hate to say middle-aged adults, but they're written for adults.
Well, Bob and I are middle-aged, so, and anyone probably 20 years younger than us, we'll consider them middle-aged too, right?
Well, it depends. You're a lot younger than I am.
Well, you keep calling yourself middle-aged because then you have a long way to go to the end.
Oh, okay.
Right, so stay middle-aged, Bob.
I'm only middle-aged if I live to be 135.
Well, that works too. I'm in.
But I think adults and older adults are the ones who tend to like my books. I've been in a couple of different book festivals lately, and the younger crowd, readers in their 20s, tend not to go for this kind of stuff. They tend to go for science fiction. They tend to go for fantasy. There's urban fantasy, paranormal romance. Those are the kinds of things that I think younger readers, when I mean younger readers, I mean readers in their 20s, teens and 20s. Those are the kinds of things that they go in for.
I think it takes till around the mid-20s, and then they start hitting more of the detective novels, the adventure novels, and then, early on, I think science fiction is bigger and more interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and there's history involved too, and that's always nice to add that in the book.
Yeah.
For people to learn, you can actually learn and read the book, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Well, yeah.
And I've also found that women, from my personal experience, talking to people.
Tell me, what from your personal experience, what do you think about women?
Well, I like women. And they tend to like me. Women tend to be the readers who tend to be readers, number one.
Oh, okay, all right. This is good. This is getting you out of the muck.
When I'm at these book fairs and I ask people, what do you like to read? The women are the ones who answer. If it's a couple, the women are the ones who answer. They say, I like to read mysteries, I like to read historical fiction.
Well, the guy always just wants to read juicy on someone's butt. I mean, or that. Right.
By and large, I know this is a vast generalization, but if you take any couple, the woman will be the reader, and the man will either say, "Oh, I don't read," or he'll say, "Oh, I read nonfiction. I don't read fiction."
That's just how we tune you guys out, just so you know.
Yeah.
work on their work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing I would tell them is read. Read as much as you can. Read as often as you can. Read for enjoyment. Read critically. Read anything you can get your hands on. Even read stuff that you don't think you're going to like. Read. Because that way you get not only a sense of what's around and what you can write, but you also, as you read, you sort of internalize the rhythms of the English language without even knowing it. So you learn how a sentence should sound, and you learn how a paragraph should sound, and so you get that sense, that sort of almost intuitive sense, just by reading a lot. And the next thing is write. Just write. Don't let yourself be discouraged. That happened to me for a long time. I didn't write for 10 years because I was just I didn't write imaginatively, that is, just because I was so discouraged at the reception that I was getting, or not getting, as the case may be. So I stopped writing, and I missed it. It was realizing how much I missed it that got me back into it. So read a lot, write a lot. Don't be discouraged. Be careful who you listen to when they give you advice. I know young writers especially want advice from as many people as they possibly can get, and just be careful of the advice that you get. If somebody tells you this isn't any good, you don't want to listen to that. You want to follow your own instincts and follow what you think what you know in your heart you want to do. I guess that's the main thing. Know in your heart what you want to do as a writer.
Now, some writers I have read, like Sidney Harris,
Mm-hmm.
wrote great articles, but they did not write books, as far as I know.
Right.
And he wrote the most imaginative articles I could imagine, but
Yeah.
that was what he wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Writing is a way of being in the world, and however you feel you are most comfortable writing is the way that you're most comfortable being in the world. Writing is a compulsion, really. I mean, it's very hard work, but it's enjoyable work, and it's a compulsion that you have to sort of answer to.
I agree, and some people are drawn to write nonfiction also.
That's correct. That's right.
Like there's a book about some people in Monroe called Darker Than Night, about them killing a hunter up north.
Okay.
And how they eventually got caught and got sent to jail. And a very interesting story, but it's true, and you read the names of people you actually know in Monroe.
That's right. That's right.
You're reading the book, so that makes it interesting.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's one of the things that people say about this series, is that they know the streets, they know the locations, they know the stores, they know the restaurants, because I'm talking about all of them in the book. And I like to say you can carry the book around with you in Ferndale, and you can follow the action because it's that
Nice.
located in the.
It could be a mystery map.
Yeah, that's right.
I like that. I like that a lot.
That's right.
That makes me think I need to see Ferndale one day soon. Well, one day I'll see about getting up there with Michelle.
Oh, absolutely, Bob. Sounds like a date. Maybe we could play that game we just learned.
Hey, yeah.
You're buying lunch, though.
We'd have everybody confused.
Oh, well, we do that quite often.
Well, that's true.
We're getting good at that.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you for being on the show. This is a great time. Excellent.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll have you on again.
I would love to be back.
And I really appreciate the inspiration that you gave to our viewers, and in both sense. I mean, with the special needs and with the information for our authors, future authors. Everyone's a future author because there's always somebody who has something to write about, right?
That's right. Everyone has a story.
Everybody has a story.
Yes.
Some we can't tell.
Well,
That's true. That's true. Don't tell all.
yeah, I never do that.
All right, so we'll be back to commercial right after this. Thank you for joining us today on APN TV Media, your author-publisher network. We had the great time today. We got to interview Mr. Donald Levin with The Forgotten Child. Now, don't forget, this is only one book in his series, and he also has a website. And Donald?
DonaldLevin.com.
I can't forget that one. See right here, DonaldLevin.com. Very interesting, eh?
Yes,
Okay.
very interesting interview.
Yes, and if you like books about, I guess you'd call it, it's kind of not scary, but it's more
No.
detective novels.
Suspenseful.
Very,
Suspense.
very it is
Yes.
very suspenseful. I'll give you that. You want to get to the end, but you don't want to get to the end. But you get to the end, it's worth it. Right? Well, thank you again for joining us, and thank you, Donald.
Thank you.
Great
Thank
day,
you.
great time.
It's been a pleasure.
Yes.
All right, and we will catch you next time on APN TV Media.
All right.
There's a place inside my mind unseen, dreams of you and I that just can't be, but I can keep them safe and locked away inside. In a perfect world where I control it, give me your heart there and I would hold it. But I know that just can't be reality. But please, don't you wake my daydream, 'cause it's so real it seems. Maybe someday I'll get my head from the clouds, but for now I'll just daydream. If you said to jump, then I will do it. Right into the fire and walk straight through it. If you knew, I bet that's just what you would say. I guess the only thing for me to do is never let you know just how I'm feeling, 'cause I don't want to know if you don't feel the same. It's a shame. Don't you wake my daydream, 'cause it's so real it seems. Maybe someday I'll get my head from the clouds, but for now I'll just daydream. 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 There's a place inside my mind unseen, dreams of you and I that just can't be, but I can keep them safe and locked away inside, inside. But don't you wake my daydream. Oh, so real it seems. Maybe someday I'll get my head from the clouds, but for now I'll just daydream. Don't you wake my daydream.